Well, welcome to the 700 Club. The U.S. dollar is king when it comes to global financial transactions. Yet there is talk of the dollar's impending doom.
And some nations are already moving away from using the dollar for international business. Dale Hurd explains why and what the dollar's demise could mean for your pocketbook.
There's been plenty of talk lately that the U.S. dollar could lose its reserve currency status.
Is King Dollar going to be tossed off of its throne?
The world has become too dependent on the U.S. dollar.
Analysts have been warning of the dollar's impending doom.
A growing number of nations are turning away from the greenback as a payment currency, and that has led to fears that the U.S. could lose its position as the world's top reserve currency. Reserve currencies are held in large quantities by central banks in other nations for financial stability and are used in international trade. It's been a big advantage for the U.S. economy. For instance, the federal government can pay for any foreign expenditures by simply printing more money. If the dollar were dethroned as the world's reserve currency, some have warned that we would see soaring inflation and a catastrophic drop in our standard of living. Other economists, however, believe the effect would not nearly be that dramatic. Experts not only fail to agree on whether the dollar is doomed to lose its reserve currency status, they also differ on what the economic fallout would be if it did. Pete Earle at the American Institute for Economic Research is one of many economists who say there is no short-term threat to the dollar's reserve currency status because there just aren't better options.
The Federal Reserve has made a lot of mistakes, and certainly they debauched the value of the dollar. But in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. The Fed is still very much the gold standard in monetary policy.
And he says there is no reason to be worried that the dollar will be replaced by the Chinese yuan.
The odds that the Chinese renminbi or yuan will take the dollar's place are at present slim to none.
The reason is China won't do what it takes to become a top reserve currency. It won't allow the yuan's value to float, but pegs it to the dollar, and its capital markets are largely closed to investors. The U.S. has the deepest capital markets in the world.
So if you want to be a reserve currency, so-called, you need a bond market, you need a securities market, a big one, and you need a lot of other features, a network of dealers, underwriters, settlement, clearance, custodians, depositories, hedging options, repo, futures, options, et cetera. And above all, you need the rule of law. Who trusts the Chinese? Nobody. Who trusts the Russians, really? Well, nobody.
Talk of a BRICS currency involving Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa is still largely just talk. America's share of the reserve currency market has fallen, but mostly because of the creation of the euro. If the dollar were replaced as the world's reserve currency, your money would be worth less. Foreign goods would cost more, inflation would increase, and the U.S. government would have to rein in its runaway spending because fewer nations would be buying U.S. treasuries and financing our huge federal debt. Nations currently ditching the dollar as a payment currency is a more pressing issue. Some nations are dropping the dollar simply to cut out the middleman. They want to use their own currency when trading. Others are afraid of a weaponized dollar after the U.S. froze hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian reserves because of its invasion of Ukraine. Others want to see America's economic dominance weakened. This is a potential near-term threat to the dollar's value, but most economists say that any threat to the dollar's reserve currency status is many years, if not decades, away. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
I think the biggest threat to the dollar is digital currency, and as that takes over transactions, the dollar is likely to be left behind. So technology is going to do it. But we are hastening that day, and the reason we're hastening that day is we're spending way too much money for government programs. When you start crossing $30 trillion in national debt, that gets everybody concerned. Not too long ago, a delegation from China came. At that point in time, China held over $1 trillion in U.S. treasuries, and they're very pointed in their question, are you going to monetize your debt? What that means is, are you just going to print more money in order to cover your shortfall and increase the float of the dollar? Well, does the Federal Reserve have the ability to do that? That's why they call it expansion of their ledger. So yes, that's out there. In response to our response to China, they said, well, we're going to sell these. We don't want to hold on to them. We're going to go to something else. That's why people are looking for another currency. When they start looking and landing on a stable digital currency, which is yet to emerge, but when it does, that will be the end of the U.S. dollar. In other news, President Biden is cutting short his visit to the Asia-Pacific region to deal with the debt ceiling crisis. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. The president leaving today for the G7 summit in Japan. Instead of stops in Papua New Guinea and Australia afterwards, he'll return home to Washington Sunday to work on the debt ceiling. After a White House summit Tuesday, the president sounded confident of a deal, while House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says there's no guarantee.
We just finished another good, productive meeting with our congressional leadership about a path forward to make sure that America does not default on its debt.
That doesn't mean we're going to get to an agreement. All it means is I think the process is a better process, is something I've been requesting for a long time, that gives us a structure to actually be more productive, but a short time frame to get it done.
Topics on the table include stricter work requirements for those on government aid and reclaiming $30 billion in unspent COVID funds. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warns the debt ceiling must be raised by June 1st to avoid a government default. Well, North Carolina Republicans overrode the governor's veto to establish a 12-week abortion ban in the state. Democrat Governor Roy Cooper blocked the bill over the weekend and tried to persuade several Republicans to support his move. In a party line vote, both houses, though, overrode the veto. The law includes exceptions for rape or incest through 20 weeks of pregnancy, life-limiting fetal anomalies up to 24 weeks, and when the mother's life is in danger. Well, Republicans in the House of Representatives accuse the FBI of a double standard in enforcing a law that protects both abortion clinics and crisis pregnancy centers. A House Judiciary Subcommittee Tuesday heard testimony of ongoing attacks against pro-life clinics and churches nationwide. George Thomas has more.
Last Wednesday, when Bob Perron saw 3 decapitated animals in front of this pro-life clinic, his first thought?
I would call it some kind of ritualistic attack.
Perron, who heads the Catholic-run JMJ Pregnancy Center in Orlando, told CBN's Faith Wire that he was shocked when he saw the remains of the animals in front of the building.
There was a huge chicken with its head cut off. There was another huge bird with its head cut off, and then a baby lamb that had been decapitated.
The group Catholic Vote says 157 churches and 87 pregnancy resource centers and other pro-life organizations across the country have been attacked since the draft Supreme Court opinion proposing to reverse Roe v. Wade was leaked in May 2022.
And these attacks have included firebombings and vandalism that includes phrases written in graffiti like, quote, "If abortions aren't safe, neither are you." It included smashing of windows, targeted online harassment, protesters threatening violence outside pregnancy resource centers and churches, and many other acts.
On Monday, Republicans on the House Judiciary Subcommittee held a hearing accusing the Biden administration and the Justice Department of using the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, or FACE Act, to unfairly target pro-life activists for prosecution.
Let me tell you what that is. That is called selective prosecution in violation of the Constitution. You cannot make prosecutorial decisions because you want to make an example out of somebody who's a well-known anti-abortion or pro-life activist.
Among those who testified was pro-life activist Mike Hawk, who was arrested in front of his 7 children last fall during a pre-dawn raid on his home by armed FBI agents for allegedly violating the FACE Act. A jury found him not guilty of the federal charges earlier this year.
They show up at your house, 20 agents, guns drawn, in front of your family, in front of... Why do you think they did it?
The intention was to humiliate me, to scare my children, and to instill fear in pro-life America.
The FACE Act, among other things, makes it a crime to cause damage or destruction to a reproductive health care facility or place of worship. Despite the hundreds of attacks against churches and pro-life facilities since last year's abortion ruling, the Justice Department has brought only 4 indictments under the FACE Act against pro-abortion activists, compared to the 26 pro-life activists allegedly facing similar violations.
The Biden administration has shown a clear double standard of enforcing the FACE Act in a way that protects pro-abortion activists and facilities while substantially ignoring attacks on pro-life advocates, facilities, and churches. And it is a disgrace that the Justice Department would rather cater to the pro-abortion political movement than protect places that assist pregnant women in need.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Some disturbing attacks. Thanks, George. Gordon, back to you.
I never thought I'd see ideology governing the FBI, but that's exactly what we're dealing with here. It's an ideology. The ideology is, well, they're pro-choice at the top levels, and therefore they're going to selectively enforce the law there. And if they were pro-life, would they do it the other way? I kind of doubt it. It's a shame when the institutions of our government are no longer trusted by the citizens, and that's what we're getting into now. When you look at the Durham report and the FBI weaponized against an incoming president, it wasn't just a candidate, but it was in the first years of his presidency. When you see this selective enforcement that if you're praying on a sidewalk and that gets 20 agents at your front door in a pre-dawn raid, well, what's that about? Absolutely, it's about intimidation, and it's trying to enforce a specific ideology or support a particular candidate for president. And it seems to be throughout the Bureau. It also seems to be throughout the intelligence services, and it seems to be within the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C. You know, what happened with that Hunter Biden laptop is actually a national shame, that during a presidential election, campaign officials for a particular candidate could drum up, well, this is somehow Russian disinformation. Well, no, it wasn't. And now that we know that, why aren't heads rolling that, you know, you have violated prohibitions against participating in presidential politics? It's amazing to me that they don't get the fundamental, and the fundamental is when the citizens no longer trust their government, when you think something is happening not because somebody violated the law, but because they're on the wrong political side, that these things are happening that way, well, then you lose faith in the government. And we can't get that back. You can't get that back once you lose that trust. So that's what we're looking at in America today. Do you trust the FBI? Do you trust the Justice Department? Do you trust our current Secretary of State? He was the campaign official that made that talking point about a laptop. Do you trust what they're going to say to you now? Do you trust our news media now? They're the ones that quash the story. But do you trust them? Are you going to say, well, you lied to me once? Are you lying now? These things are fundamental to our culture. And are you destroying it for a short-term political victory? Are you destroying it for some kind of ideological reasons? Well, please stop. We need to be able to trust the government. We need to be able to trust political candidates. And especially, we need to be able to trust news media.